Please make sure before you leave, you grab this book because we are here for the business. Trade, right? Trade. I think that's why Honorable Rwabwogo is here, is to make sure the Ugandan coffee is on your table, Ugandan vanilla is on your table, Uganda vegetables, fruits, everything is on your table. So you will see everything is in this booklet. So if you really also want to get those products, those goods on your table, make sure you have them. The chamber is about the business. We are here for business. It is time now to invite our guest of honor, Honorable Odrek Rwabwogo. As I mentioned before, he's a senior advisor of the President Museveni of Uganda. Also, he's the chairman of Presidential Advisory Committee on Exports and Industrial Development. He's also a businessman. He likes to be called a farmer. So, Farmer Rwabwogo, welcome.
My brother and friend, Dr. Olivier Kamanzi, who has done a very good job making the calls, gathering us this afternoon here. My brother Cody Lawrence, who is one of our trade reps here. I've seen Johnson from Detroit, who just walked in. I see Dr. Shuri. I see faces I know. And my sister from the Horn of Africa, who I found on the floor making fantastic remarks on Tigray and Sudan and the work you're doing. And all of you who really made it this afternoon to just listen to the Uganda story, the African story. I'm touched by the remarks of Mr. Blackwell. He's trying to tell you that in human beings, human person is a perspective. Perspective made of many stories. And if you don't have your story anchored somewhere, you have no center of gravity. I heard his words and very touching. I apologize, I'm not dressed with a tie, and so don't think that I'm making this event informal. It's just that I've been crossing many continents. I came from China, and then I had a couple of days in Serbia, in South Central Europe, and then I went to New Hampshire, which I left early this morning, so I didn't have time to prepare and put on a tie, so I want to apologize for that. So, I was just thinking in the car coming, what can I share with you? I could do a presentation about Uganda, but I thought, let me just speak to you, because I know that a number of you, few of you have been to Uganda, so perhaps explaining where Uganda is and East Africa and a bit of background will give you some context. So the year is 1860. I think the month is May, like now. And there was a young man, a lawyer, trying to run for president here, who you know very well, Abraham Lincoln. And I'm told that he came from a place called Springfield, which is not too far from here. That same year, that same month, our country received a group of people we had never seen in 500 years, and they were from Britain, and they interfered with what I call social, political, economic formation of those Central African societies. And between 1860 and 1900, many of those kingdoms that had started in the year 1415, so we had a number of Great Lakes. We call them Great Lakes in Africa, the River Congo, the Lake Victoria. I have local names that I would share with you, but I know that they would make difficult pronunciation or memorizing them for you. But these were emerging societies that were smelting iron, were rearing so many herds of cattle. We have a cow that you see at Egyptian murals, 7,000 years old. It was a very developed civilization, but it was not fully linked to the economic development of the rest of the world. So in 1900, that society was destroyed completely, and a British company, not a state, a British company that came with a franchise from the Queen, signed agreements with several chiefs, eventually creating what we call Uganda. And between 1900 and 1962, 62 years when the British took control of that part of the world, 4 societies emerged, 4 different types, categories emerged, just for you to get some context. So the first group of people were sons of chiefs and priests. If you're not a son, not daughters. A son of a priest or a chief was the only one allowed to go to school. And because of that, a lot of our initial civil servants, diplomats, politicians, were sons of chiefs and priests, and there was no attention to business. You looked forward to your son, not daughter. Daughters is much recent, as in many parts of the world and in Uganda. You looked to take a child, not to a technical college, to learn the arts, to do the business, but to take them to university so that they become diplomats, they work with the government. That sort of diverted the thinking on how you build a country. And what I say of Uganda is much of the rest of Africa. Second category of group that emerged was an illiterate army that came from what we call in English acephalous societies. And a acephalous society doesn't have centralized kingship. So the English were very clear on what they wanted, loyalty. That if you're not attached to a king, then I can make an army out of you, and you are only loyal to me. And your means of social ascent is a rifle. This is how we got a man called Idi Amin as the highest senior army officer by the time we became independent. That army was not linked to production, not educated, not integrated in terms of how you create a nation state. The third category was a small group of people called Afro-Asians, so Afro-Arabs, because we had the early interaction with the Asian world. Recently we found in a part of India called Gujarat some seeds that came from Africa 2,500 years ago, seeds of millet, seeds of sorghum. These are, if you come from West Africa, there's a type of grain called fonio. If you come from Ethiopia, it's called teff. These are gluten-free ancient grains that Africans grew for many years. So this small group were the only ones, they were 1%, they were the only ones allowed to process coffee, cotton, tobacco. If they found you as an African trying to do any form of processing, you are arrested, charged, imprisoned for about 15 years. And so that's the third. The fourth category is the one I was born into in 1969. 96% of our country when I was born was peasants. A peasant, you don't have peasants anymore in the US. But a peasant is the one who goes to the forest, cuts a piece of tree and makes a bed, gets some herbs, makes medicine. This is how our country was. So for you to bring these groups together, you needed to have a political movement. So you had someone speak about President Museveni. So as young people in the 70s and 80s, they began a movement to unite sons of chiefs and daughters, chiefs and priests, train the army, re-establish security, and create a stronger, better nation state. When we created that political movement, it gave us capacity now to recruit and train a good army that is very educated, that now stabilizes Congo, South Sudan, and Somalia, and many parts of Africa. And when we did those two things, it allowed us to build the economy. The economy was $1.5 billion about 30 years ago. Now we are about $189 billion in purchasing power parity terms. And we are growing an entrepreneurial class that considers adding value of products at home, creating the necessary infrastructure to trade. And so the work I do today is to expand the capabilities of that country by doing 4 things. Going to the markets with our eyes wide open. So I'm coming from China, from Guangzhou, to negotiate stopping bringing refined cotton products into Uganda, yet Uganda and East Africa produces long staple cotton, to find a way we can work together to be able to build businesses that supply Asia. To roast coffee at home so that coffee is not Italian. And I'm saying this with all humility because whenever I go through hotels in parts of Europe and you say, where is that coffee from? They straight out say Bologna. I said, no. Bologna doesn't grow coffee. Coffee is African, is Ethiopian, is Ugandan. And so we're making sure that we roast that coffee at home. So get to the markets with your eyes open, appoint trade representatives, conduct basic research, ensure that you open trade hubs. This is what I'm doing, and this is what we're hoping to do in Chicago. Second thing working on is that when the market speaks to you, it requires compliance to particular standards, food safety standards. So we're making and changing laws on food safety to ensure that our fruits and vegetables, our grains can satisfy the international standard. And the third thing we're doing is to ensure that we have the necessary infrastructure to lower the unit cost of production and export to these markets. On Monday, I'm in Washington to negotiate with Boeing. We want to buy some freighters to be able to prepare our airports for Category 1, for us to land products here and in New York. Infrastructure in the air, infrastructure on the water, infrastructure on the land. We're trying to negotiate standard gauge railway line. The whole of Africa, if I had time, it's short. 70 years of independence, total kilometers of rail is 75,000. In Asia, it's 230,000. And so to move from one point to another with cargo is still a problem. So we're working on things like that to find capital investment to build this capacity, because we have language, culture connection with America, with the West, and less with the places where capital in infrastructure investment is coming from. And so the final thing I'm working on is to set up an export credit fund so that if you have a business investing in Uganda to supply anywhere, we will finance that business with raw material, with crop finance, so that if there's an order for X coffee tonnage, X cotton tonnage, we make sure that we finance it. So I began my remarks with Abraham Lincoln. Why? Because sometimes the most ignored, the most underestimated, the most rejected often can become the cornerstone for fixing society's problems. So I've read the history of Abraham Lincoln and how much he did to end slavery and keep the country together through the Civil War, whatever opinions people have. President Museveni is our Abraham Lincoln. We didn't have a country until really 1986. He's been in government for some time, but we've increased our economic capabilities. We built more infrastructure, and the second generation of reforms now we are pushing are based on that foundation. He too was not taken seriously until many people began to see that to change Africa, you need to give it the economic means. You need to have the thinking that says you do not allow processing of raw materials out of your country and hope to grow. So we are building electric cars, for example. We're looking for investment in lithium batteries in our country. We manufacture almost all our consumer goods. And this economy now is asking for a couple of things that bring me here. And I'm looking for partnerships in those areas. I'm happy to know that a number of people here are business people, and they understand. I'm a businessman. I come from spent 18 years of my life at the farm. My parents learned reading and writing in church. I would never have been to school, neither my siblings, if my parents hadn't learned reading and writing in church. So faith is important to us. I'm very happy to see faith people in the audience. But I also understood that it's not enough to simply be independent or have faith. It's important that you grow certain capabilities. You build businesses that can employ young people so that they are confident, independent, and they are able to look to the world in terms of partnership and not asking for any help, but making points of connection to ensure that if they are Americans, African Americans, or other people coming to Uganda, we meet at a point of what do you do with us and what do we support and what do you bring in the country. So in business, we know that the business can compete at multiple bases. You can compete either at a design level if you have a product, or price level, or you can compete at a marketing level. But we call those points of parity. Everyone does that. So sometimes Africa comes to you, speaking to you with points of parity that everyone has. I want to speak to you about a point of difference for Uganda, why it's important to work with Uganda. 3 areas of uniqueness. First, if you take that map, we don't have time, I would have shown you on the screen, everywhere across Africa is 3 hours. Whether it's Egypt or South Africa or Nigeria or Ghana, 3 hours. It's the center of Africa. And it sits in a market of 1.3 billion people, $18 trillion in terms of power purchasing parity now, because we've signed the Africa Common Market. So when we invite you to Uganda, we're not speaking about only the East African market, which is 200 million people. We're speaking about Africa. We're looking for partnerships on patents, on value addition, to supply this large market so that we can stave off products that we have imported for 100 years from Europe and now China and many other places. So that uniqueness of the market and that country being very open. Uganda is the only place you bring in $1 million, you take it out as 12%, no questions asked. Why? Because we believe that openness is what protects investments, is what protects private enterprises. Second point of difference is that you have availability of almost all the raw materials you can think of, from minerals to agriculture to labor. If I give you just one example, fish. We produce some of the largest size fish. Nile perch weighs 80 to 100 kilograms. We want to produce 1 million tons of fish. For us to do that, we're now at 168,000. For us to do that, we're looking for investment in fish feeds. To produce fish feeds, you need soya beans and corn. And we have a lot of land, And we have a market 12 euros in Europe a kilo of fish. But you really require technology, you require exposure to be able to produce feeds. You need about 800,000 metric tons of soya, 600,000 tons of corn for you to produce 1 million tons of fish. We want to do this by 2030. We're looking for companies that we can co-invest with to supply that market. So availability of raw materials, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's coffee, this is a point of difference. The other one is the unique incentives we give. So I'm looking for, East Africa has some of the best soccer players, some of the best athletes. And thank you. And we're looking for, and we produce cotton. But you don't have the international brands that you see for apparel, for shoes. We're building a high altitude center for runners, and we're looking for partnerships on setting up machinery, equipment to produce our cotton, because WTO, World Trade Organization, allows us to produce apparel free of polyester, but we require certain capabilities. So as I close, I'm asking for 3 things. First, a lot of products to offtake from Uganda. Banana, banana flour, coffee, tea, many things that you heard Dr. Kamanzi mention. We will support you on offtake of these products. We will provide financing for farmers to do aggregation and ensure that your cost of transport is much lower. 2, investment in these value chains, so refrigeration. A lot of good pineapples get wasted, mangoes, and will require investment in refrigeration and transport, investment in tourism and hospitality. We have, in the total world, the number of gorillas is 600. Uganda has 490, but nobody knows that. We want hotels in these locations. We are looking for a culture exchange with this city of Chicago. I had the commissioner from Cook County. Chicago, 1848, began the first commodity exchange. And we're really trying to do that in Uganda. We're looking for partnerships of that nature. And eventually, an ecosystem. What you heard my brother Cody say, we're trying to build ecosystems that give these industries presence and scale. We can only do it with you because there is a relationship. And this relationship is what I want us to really nurture. I hope Dr. Olivier has invited you for this event we have in June. Have you?
Not yet.
You need to do that because so Rwabwogo touched a bit of so we want to have you in June and show you the places where ancient history that you never get to see in the US starts. We want to give you names that mean where you come from. And we want our heads of state, heads of institutions, cultural leaders to spend a week really doing that so that there is a point of connection. Why? Because enterprise is the future of the world. The 750 million people that he speaks of from China is because China spent time through their leader called Deng Xiaoping empowering the Chinese to do what they call their own capitalism with Chinese characteristics. Everyone can do their own capitalism with their characteristics. But you need meaning and language, and those things come from understanding each other at a cultural level. So I'm hoping that in June, we should be able to do this. I really want to stop here and take some questions. I thank you so much for creating this evening to be here. Always a pleasure to be in Chicago. Our head of state was here in December of 2022 and would like to set up a trade hub here and have more of our products here, but most importantly, to understand each other, to be able to do capital attraction to be able to do patents that we can work on together for the undiscovered medicines and pharmaceutical elements that are natural from our continent that nobody is touching. Restaurants that have food and recipes. Stories that movies haven't been shot. Scripts haven't been written because we haven't had this connection. Yeah? I watched some time back DiCaprio and the story of it's called, there's a movie, I forget, it's called The Killers of the Moonflower. Has anyone watched that? Well, I'm watching American movies and you haven't. You need to watch that movie. When people have a lot of resources and they don't know what they are seated on, they fall prey to other people. There's an author, I forget on whose that story is based. Watch that movie, you'll see what Africa has and how so little knowledge they have of it. Yet it has friends, allies. For me, it's not color, it is the thinking. That's why Cody is introducing himself, the white man in the room. He's just joking, because for me, what's important is thinking. If we think in the same direction, thinking is profound. We can change our world if we gather around particular thoughts that say we're creating a center of gravity for who we are for the future. Thank you and God bless you.
Thank you, Mr. Rwabwogo. Let's take
It's on. Say your name for me so I can pronounce it. Odrek Rwabwogo. Just say Odrek.
Honorable Odrek.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming to Chicago. My name is Dr. Wale Idris. I'm the Nigerian American politician of Africa, publisher of Africa US Today magazine online. You can Google it anywhere, whether you are in Uganda, Nigeria, Chicago, Africa USA Today magazine. I thank you for this opportunity that Dr. Olivier gave me to interview you. So Chicago is the first base, or the only place to come to promote the Ugandan business, or you go everywhere.
So thank you so much. Chicago is a starting point because, like I said in my remarks, there's a bit of history. The Chicago Board of Trade, 1848, commodity exchange. Our countries are still commodity moving into industry. So it's a good place to learn how things are done in terms of institutions, raising money, finding markets, value addition. Now, that's one reason why I'm here. But secondly, I have good people here. Olivier is doing a fantastic job.
Oh, yes.
See how he's organized the evening.
Yes.
We have Cody Lawrence, who is in Aurora, with an actual cafe that does Uganda roasted coffee. And then there's several Ugandan businesses here, and we think we should have a small trade house which will facilitate bringing at least 13 different types of Uganda products so that the tastes and preferences of Chicago people get to know about Uganda.
Yes, I'm very captivated by that event on June 24 in
Kampala, yes.
Kampala, yes. So I'll make sure that I really invite people to come there. He knows my work. So what can people expect to see when you come there with a pocket full of money?
So Uganda is very welcoming, has a lot of production, but limited processing, refrigeration, transportation. So you have a lot of production and many unmet needs. That's called opportunity. We want to introduce them to these unmet needs, but also see if they can tie up with Ugandan businesses, African businesses, to be able to work together on adding value to sesame, for example. So China requires $800 million worth of sesame oil. Uganda is number 6 in the world producing sesame, but we don't add value. I want to add value with an American company supplying China. That's how relationships are created. Now, so we want to introduce them to these kinds of opportunities. 2, there's a cultural emotional connection. There's a bond that many African countries, especially in the East, have not created with African Americans. there's a whole lot of emotional investment that is required just as much as financial investment for people to know their origin, to name them, give them local names, to meet our kings and queens, and see if they can find some sort of cultural center of gravity that begins to attract them for economic reasons, but to have a place you call home. Because this is, when I come here, I feel home, at home.
Good.
That's the way they should feel in my country.
Yeah, thank you for answering that.